Picture this scene. Mid-July, high noon. The sun is beating down so hard that the air above the plants seems to shimmer. You walk toward your tomatoes with a bucket of water, just like always, like every other day, like you've done for years. The soil is dry, the surface is cracked, and the bottom leaves are starting to droop a little. You think to yourself again, if I don't water them now, they're going to wilt. So you water each plant carefully, with love, bucket after bucket. You watch the soil absorb the water and you feel relieved. There, I saved them. But the next day you water again, and the day after that too. And at the end of the season, you harvest large tomatoes, sure, but they are watery, lacking flavor, and often cracked after the rain. And you ask yourself, where is that incredible harvest I was expecting? That happened to me for many years. I was sure I was doing everything right. I watered regularly, managed soil moisture, fertilized, mulched, and read advice. But the result was always just average. There were tomatoes, yes, but not those real tomatoes you want to show off with pride. Everything changed one summer afternoon when Uncle Serge Gay, an agronomist with many years of experience, came to see me. He walked among my tomato plants, looked at the bushes, touched the soil, tasted a tomato right off the vine, and said something that left me thinking, "You are drowning them with so much care." Honestly, that phrase bothered me a bit. What do you mean I'm drowning them when I'm doing exactly everything to help them? But then he started explaining something that completely changed my understanding of tomatoes. And the more he spoke, the clearer it became that I wasn't failing in the small details. I was failing at the very foundation. If you want truly tasty, meaty, and resilient tomatoes, you first have to understand one very important thing. The tomato is not a plant born to live with constant surface watering. The tomato comes from dry areas of South America, from places where it is hot during the day and cool at night, where rain doesn't fall every 2 days, and where the soil doesn't retain water at the surface. There, over thousands of years, the tomato learned to survive by seeking moisture deep underground. In other words, the tomato is equipped to fight for water. It is built to develop deep, strong roots capable of finding moisture even when everything up top seems dry. And this is where we make the most common mistake. We water from above, right around the stem. We only wet the top layer of the soil. So what does the plant do? The logical thing, it stops looking for water down below. If water always appears at the top, the roots stay at the top. They become shallow, weak, and dependent. And what happens next? That top layer of soil is the most unstable of all. It heats up significantly during the day, dries out in a few hours, and suffers from all the sudden changes. The roots live in constant stress. Furthermore, shallow roots cannot properly feed a large plant. And worst of all, the tomato becomes dependent on watering. It no longer knows how to fend for itself. That is why the same thing happens so often. If you skip watering for one day, the plant droops. If it then rains heavily or you water all at once, the fruits crack. And in the end, you get tomatoes that look beautiful on the outside but are weak on the inside. Uncle Sergey explained something very simple to me. If you give the tomato water all the time at the surface, you never force its roots to actually work. And that's when I understood the huge difference between watering to make yourself feel better and watering the right way to strengthen the plant. In many warm regions where tomatoes have been grown for centuries, the approach is different. Not watering a little bit frequently, but watering deeply or even significantly reducing watering once the plant is well established. The goal is not to make the tomato suffer, but to teach it to look for water where it should. Because when the plant receives less water, but in a smarter way, something very interesting happens. The fruits don't fill up with as much water, but they do concentrate more flavor. They have more intensity, more aroma, and more natural sweetness. They tend to be a bit smaller, yes, but much better. And at that moment I thought, very nice in theory, but how do you do this in practice without ruining the entire harvest? That was where the most important part of this whole story began. If it were as easy as just stopping watering, everyone would already be doing it. But it doesn't work like that. The biggest mistake you can make is to suddenly stop watering a plant that has received water every 2 days its entire life. That's not a method. That's just severe stress that can ruin the harvest. The change starts from the very beginning, from the moment you plant the tomatoes. Uncle Sergey called it educating the roots. The principle is simple. After planting, you give them a heavy watering just once, enough for the soil to compact well around the roots and for the plant to adapt, and then you step back. Yes, the plant is going to react. In the first few days, the leaves will droop a bit. It will look weak, even sad. And this is where almost everyone makes the same mistake. They see that, and they run for the water. But right at that moment, the most important thing is happening. When the plant feels a lack of water at the surface, it activates a natural mechanism. The roots start growing downward in search of moisture. They lengthen, branch out, and penetrate into deeper layers of the soil where there is always some water, even in summer. In just a few days, the plant can develop a much deeper root system than it would have with constant watering. And then something key happens. By the third or fourth day, the plant recovers on its own, not because you watered it, but because it found water by itself. At that point, it is no longer a dependent plant. It is a strong plant. But here is something very important that many overlook. This method only works well if the soil is prepared correctly. Because if you have sand that doesn't hold water or clay that hardens like cement, simply stopping watering isn't enough. You need to create conditions so the soil retains moisture deep down while also allowing the roots to breathe. And this is where the most important element of the whole system comes into play. Mulch. Mulch. Do you know what happens to bare soil? On a hot day, it loses water at an enormous rate. Through evaporation alone, it can lose gallons and gallons in just a few hours. That means when you water without covering the soil, a large part of the water simply disappears. It doesn't reach the roots. Mulch acts as a barrier. It is a layer of organic matter that protects the soil from the sun. Underneath the mulch, the earth stays cool, moist, and alive. Additionally, weed growth is reduced. A hard crust doesn't form on the surface. Soil life is activated. Microorganisms, earthworms, fungi. And this is key. Living soil retains water better, but not just any mulch will do. Thickness matters. A thin layer of 2 to 3 cm is almost nothing. You need at least 8 to 10 cm, ideally more. The best materials are dried grass, straw, leaves, compost, or untreated wood. And there is a very important detail. The mulch should not touch the stem. Leave a small space around the plant. Otherwise, you can cause excessive moisture at the base and fungal problems. Another common mistake is putting the mulch down too early. First, let the soil warm up after planting. Then, a week later, cover the surface. Now let's get back to watering. After the first watering at planting, you observe. If it is extremely hot and the plant is suffering too much, you can help it a little, but do not overwater. Just enough so as not to damage it. If the temperature is moderate, wait. In most cases, the plant adapts on its own in a few days. The first real watering is done 1 or 2 weeks later, when the plant has already started to take root. But it is not a shallow watering. It is a deep watering. The goal is for the water to reach 15 to 20 cm or more. That way you teach the roots where the water is. The second important moment is when the fruits begin to form. At that point, the plant needs support because if the stress is too severe, it can lose flowers and small fruits. The third moment is during the growth of the fruits, and everything else depends on the weather and the plant, not the calendar. Look at the leaves in the morning. That is the best indicator. If they are firm in the morning, everything is fine. If they are drooping in the morning, the plant needs water. But if they only droop at noon in the intense heat and recover by the afternoon, that is normal. It is protection, not a lack of water. On average, with this method, tomatoes receive only 4 to 6 waterings throughout the entire season. Not every 2 days, just a few times, but at the right moment. When I first heard that, I thought, that can't possibly work in my garden. But I tried it, and what happened next surprised even me. That year, I decided to test the method. It was late April. The seedlings were strong, green, and ready to go into the ground. I prepared the bed differently. Before planting, I did something I had never done before. I soaked the soil deeply, not a shallow watering, but a heavy watering to act as a reserve. I wanted the soil to have water deep down right from the start. The next day I planted the tomatoes, watered each one just once, and stopped. The first few days were tough to watch. Drooping leaves, especially on the cherry tomatoes. Everything in me wanted to grab the watering can, but I held back. On the fourth day, the plants started to perk up. By the fifth day, they were firm. And the most curious thing was that they weren't growing upward like before, but rather they looked more compact, stronger, as if they were growing downward first. And they were. A week later, I put down the mulch, dried grass, a thick layer, and from that moment on, I did almost nothing, just observed. And here is where it got interesting. First, the growth. It wasn't fast and weak. It was steady and strong. Thick stems, dark leaves, firm, not soft like when there is excess water. Second, the health. Until the end of July, not a single sign of disease. While typical problems were already starting in the neighboring gardens, my plants were clean. Third, the flowering. It started a little later, but it was much more stable. Almost all the flowers turned into fruits. At that moment, I understood something important. When the plant feels that resources are limited, it tries to ensure its reproduction. It produces more fruits, but here is a key: balance. It's not about drying the plant out completely. It's about giving it a little less than what is comfortable, but not so little as to stop its growth. I learned to observe the leaves in the morning. That became my main indicator. Over time, I started to get a feel for the plant, when it is doing well and when it truly needs water. By July, I had only watered twice since planting. Twice, and then came the real test: a severe heat wave. Several days over 35 degrees Celsius without rain. The neighbors were watering multiple times a day. I just watched my plants. During the day, the leaves drooped a little. In the afternoon, they recovered. I would stick my hand under the mulch, and down there was moisture, coolness, life. On the fourth day of the heat, I decided to water a little. That was the third watering of the season. The plants reacted perfectly, and here I noticed another important difference. Not a single tomato cracked, not one. While others had fruits that split open after every watering or rain, mine stayed firm. Why? Because the plant was no longer living in extremes. Dry, wet, dry, wet. It was living in a more stable balance. And then came the moment I will never forget: the first ripe tomatoes. I picked a heavy, dense one, cut it, and the flesh was dark, rich, with almost no gaps. I tasted a piece and realized that something had truly changed. It wasn't a normal tomato. It was concentrated, sweet, with a real aroma, like the tomatoes from the old days. At that moment, I thought, how many years have I been watering and losing flavor without realizing it? But mind you, not everything was perfect. I made mistakes, and those mistakes are important because you might make them too. For example, in the middle of summer, some lower leaves started to turn yellow. I thought it was a lack of water or nutrients and was about to water more. Luckily, I asked for advice first. It turned out to be a normal process. The plant simply redistributes energy to the most active parts into the fruit. If I had overwatered at that moment, I would have caused unnecessary growth instead of improving the harvest. I also made a mistake with the mulch. I placed it too close to the stem on one plant, and excessive moisture appeared at the base. I had to fix it quickly and learn something important. Details matter, but even with those mistakes, the result was better than all my previous years. And that was just the first year, because what happened next was even more interesting. At the end of that first season, I decided to calculate everything with numbers. Same bed, same tomatoes, same space. In previous years, with constant watering, I harvested about 25 to 30 kilo at most. That year, 47 kilo, almost double, without extra fertilizers, without expensive systems, without a greenhouse, just by changing the way I watered. That's when I realized this wasn't a coincidence, but the most interesting part came later. Uncle Sergey visited my garden again, walked among the plants, touched the soil, looked at everything in silence, and then said, "Now I'm going to show you the next level." And he gave me 3 keys that changed everything even more. The first, a deep water reserve in the fall. Instead of thinking only about the summer, you prepare the soil beforehand. After the fall harvest, you do a very heavy watering, not superficial, but deep. The goal is for the water to go down to layers where the sun can't evaporate it. It stays there as a reserve. In the spring, that moisture is still there. And when the roots go down, they find it. It's like saving money to use later. The second key, plants that work the soil for you. After the season, you sow crops like mustard, oats, or clover, not to harvest but to improve the soil. Their roots penetrate deeply and create small channels in the soil. When they die, those channels remain. And what happens next? Water enters better, tomato roots go down more easily, and the soil becomes looser, more alive. It's as if someone had paved the way underground before you. The third key was the most unexpected. He told me, loosening the soil is like watering, but without water. When the soil surface compacts, moisture rises and evaporates quickly. But if you break that layer, even just a few inches, you stop the process. The water stays below. That's why after rain or watering, a little shallow loosening can conserve as much moisture as an additional watering. It's something many overlook, but it works with these three things: water reserve, soil improving plants, and maintaining the structure. The whole system becomes stronger. The second year, I did everything correctly, and the result was even greater. 54 kilo of tomatoes, more than double what I used to get. But the most important thing wasn't the quantity, it was the time. I stopped running around with the watering can every 2 days. I stopped worrying constantly. The garden stopped being a chore and became something I enjoyed. I would go out in the morning with a coffee in my hand, look at the plants, observe, and that was it. And at that moment, I understood something simple, but very important. It's not always about doing more, but doing better. Over time, I understood something even more important. The soil changes. It doesn't get worse from watering less. It improves, because when you stop constantly saturating it with water, it starts to breathe. Microorganisms work better, more earthworms appear, the structure becomes loose, alive like a sponge, and living soil retains moisture much better than compacted, drowned soil. It's a cycle. Better soil means less need for water, which leads to even better soil. But there is something many people fear: diseases and problems. For example, blossom end rot, those dark spots on the fruit. Many think it's an infection, but in reality, it's usually a calcium absorption problem. And why does it happen? Because of sudden changes in moisture. When the soil constantly goes from dry to very wet, the plant can't transport nutrients well. With this method, moisture is more stable, and that problem appears much less. The same goes for many diseases. They like constant moisture on the surface. When the soil isn't always wet on top, they simply don't have ideal conditions. It's not magic, it's logic. After several years, I understood something that changed the way I look at the garden. The tomato doesn't need you hovering over it all the time. It needs you to not stop it from doing what it already knows how to do. It knows how to look for water, it knows how to adapt, it knows how to survive, and when you give it that chance, it rewards you with much better fruit. More flavor, more aroma, denser, more natural. Now I propose something simple. You don't have to change your whole garden. Try it with just 2 or 3 plants, a cherry, a large variety. Plant them, water them well only at the beginning, add mulch, and then just observe. Watch how they grow, how they react to the heat, how the fruit tastes at the end, and compare it to what you normally do, because the difference is noticeable, and very much so. If you decide to try it, tell me in the comments what climate you're in, what variety you used, and what result you got. Every experience helps to better understand how this works in different conditions. And if you like these kinds of real, uncomplicated tips that actually work, subscribe to the channel. There are no empty theories here, only things you can verify with your own hands. See you in the next video, and may you have an incredible harvest, the kind you eat straight from the plant with nothing else. If this story has transformed the way you view growing in your garden, please subscribe and like this video. We are unearthing nature's secrets that many have forgotten. Grow the future with us. The next treasure of knowledge will open very soon.